Did you know the Bible has a book of marriage counseling instructions? Today we walk down Route 66 and we come to the book of Song of Solomon. It's not a book that most of us read for devotional literature. It's a book that talks about Solomon's passion and his attraction to a young commoner called the Shulamite. Every couple who's experienced infatuation finds that it leads to romance and then to commitment and to marriage. It's the discovery of the feeling of a special sense of completion. There's the high of emotional waves that are difficult to sustain in our lives. But these phrases of Solomon's passion for this young woman called the Shulamite rise like recurring highs across the ocean of emotion. This unlikely love story between the king and the commoner is an exploration for understanding that marriage was instituted for our joy. The book is composed of 15 reflections written as lyric poetry. One might read them as pages from a love journal, brimming with insights about romance, marriage, and intimacy. You might be reminded of the love letters you exchanged with your partner in romance. Not all of us had to carry on romantics across the state line or across a nation or the oceans, but some of us had that experience, and we wrote letters back and forth to each other long before email or long before we had Zoom or the other opportunities for sharing face-to-face on the internet. So in some ways you could look to this as a pile of love letters from Solomon to the Shulamite and her responses to him. Solomon's gift for language and wisdom can hardly be matched by our common descriptions of marriage. If you look at these words, they soar to heights that remind us that we cannot allow resentment, selfishness, and neglect to nibble away at our homes. The tiny infractions of our joyous moments become the little foxes, as he refers to them, that spoil the vines. When you think about marriage, you recognize that little things count in a big way. Small sins can produce big problems, but small acts of love can yield lasting blessings. God's pattern for courtship and marriage provides a template for a beautiful and lasting relationship based on his unquenchable love. Song of Solomon chapter 8 verses 6 to 7 reflects the promise of the lovers here to each other. And here Solomon writes, "Set me as a seal upon your heart and as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it." The only sermon I think I ever heard from the book of Song of Solomon was in a sermon at a minister's conference, and a friend of mine was illustrating the Song of Solomon, and he told this story. A young couple was ready to be married. They lived on a farm quite a ways away from where the minister who was to marry them lived. And it rained and it rained and it rained. And they came to the place where normally they would cross the river, and it was so flooded that even the buggy or an individual on a horse would have a hard time crossing the river. So the young couple sat in the buggy and looked across the river, and there on the other side was the minister who was to marry them. And in spite of the noise of the rushing river, the minister went through the words of the ceremony, and the young couple responded. And when my friend was through with the sermon, he said, "Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it." Now, maybe that's a simple illustration of what Solomon is talking about here, but you and I have had lots of things that tests our relationships along the way. There are little foxes in all of our lives that nibble away at the health of the romance in the home. And we need to pray that God will continue to increase not only our care of each other, but our passion for each other as he teaches us what romance really means. There's a prayer that all of us need to pray for our marriages. Father, may I learn to love purely and to be loved fully. The marriage that lasts, which shares the understanding of how to give oneself to the other, is the marriage that God designed. When I was asked to speak to couples about marriage, one of the things that I would share with them is that every marriage needs at least 3 things that start with the letter G. Every marriage needs a gift, that is the gift of self to each other. It's good that we give gifts like rings and watches and things that are possessions that we can share with each other, and they delight us. But the most important thing that we can share with each other is the gift of that inner self, that beauty of soul that our lovers need most of everything that we have. A second thing that a good marriage needs is a goal. You see, marriage is not really 2 people looking moony-eyed at each other and absorbed in each other, but it's 2 people standing shoulder to shoulder, looking ahead and sharing the same goal. And the third thing that a good marriage needs is a God. As Solomon teaches the Shulamite to share with him in his sharing of his love for God, so we need to share our love for God with each other. Some years ago, when our family was on vacation in Southern California, I watched as a speedboat was pulling 2 skiers behind it across the lake. And as the 2 skiers would put their skis toward each other in the center where the boat was moving straight ahead, they could go further and further and further apart until they were almost 45 degrees. But as soon as they stopped resisting the flow of the boat, the power of that boat moving straight ahead pulled them back to each other, and they could reach out and hold hands as they skied across the lake. That's what you and I need when God leads us into a relationship that we can share a triangular one, God, a man, and a woman. And every marriage needs that kind of a God at its core. When you and I look at the book of Song of Solomon, we discover these principles that can be applied to our marriages and that can be applied to our joys in life. Finally, The husband and wife who learns to surrender to God can share the best that he has planned for them. If you haven't discovered yet that God wants you and your spouse to have the best that he's planned in marriage, I hope today will be the beginning of your discovery.